To start the description of my spiritual journey, I have to tell you about a man that really lit the fire, religious fire in my life. And I actually grew up in New Jersey, and this man walked across New Jersey. But I didn't get to meet him, I'm sad to say, because he walked across New Jersey in the 17th century, around 1680. And that man who walked across New Jersey, his name is George Fox. And I would imagine that many Quakers don't know that George Fox actually came to New Jersey, which he did. He visited the community or colony that his person William Penn set up. And you can read all about his journey walking across New Jersey in the journal of George Fox, but that's another story. But the way I connected with George Fox is that my folks wanted me to have a good education, and it just so happened there was a Quaker day school near where I grew up, so they made the mistake of arranging for me to go to high school at that place. And we were required at that, now we're talking about, I first went there in 1960, and we were required to sit in silence for an hour every week. And I did that for 4 years throughout my high school. And during that time, there wasn't very much religious practices that people did that required sitting in silence. And there was, of course, a lot of, most churches did worship services and everything, but that was kind of unusual. And for some reason, that resonated with me on a very deep level. And the other thing that resonated with me on a very deep level was reading the journal of George Fox. I'm often surprised at how little so many Quakers know about George Fox, his life, what motivated him. It's an amazing story. He grew up in a small village, and he knew that there was something lacking in life. One of his relatives had been a saint in the Catholic Church. And he, at an early age, decided to give his life on the search for spiritual realization or religious realization. And he started walking around England as a homeless wanderer. And he went to many different ministers and asked them tried to get some handle on what life and religious meaning of life. And he, of course, was very disappointed with the many people that he talked to. He couldn't find anyone who could give him an answer. But the key is that he made his entire life a one-pointed effort for spiritual, what you might call spiritual realization. And of course, he famously climbed on Pendle Hill. And it was there that he had the deep realization, not more like an experience, that the entire universe is an expression of God. And so that something connected with me on that. And I ended up going to the university in Pennsylvania, and this was like in the middle 60s, and I attended a Quaker meeting there. I was the only student at that meeting, and for the year I was there. And anyway, later I was in the Army at the time of the draft, and I felt very out of sorts there. And at one point I missed my bus on the way back to the base. And the next stop, after about a mile to the next stop, I got off and I looked, I saw this building right across the street, and it was a Shrewsbury Quaker meeting. and there are a bunch of people standing outside. Anyway, so I ended up getting involved with that meeting. But what George Fox was an example of is he saw religion as not something that I'm a this and I believe that. I'm such and such a religion and we believe such and such. You know, in our society, we respect science a great deal, and we think science is the real thing. That's intellectually rigorous and honest and so forth. Whereas religion is kind of a lesser, institution. It's more like, well, that's your personal belief, which I believe is that religion is what's real, and just as intellectually rigorous and just as is authentic or more authentic than science. And George Fox was, in a sense, you could say he was the first person that showed me that. And let's see, so years later, I attended a meeting in Seattle, and at that time, it was one of those popcorn meetings where people talked a lot, and I read about a group that met in silence for an hour without talking, and they were a Buddhist group. So I ended up for a long time getting involved with Buddhist meditation, and while in Seattle at Seattle Friends meeting, one day they said they were going to have a visitor at the end of the meeting, and they said it was a woman who was a homeless wanderer who wore a blue tunic and called herself Peace Pilgrim. And I remember thinking, boy, that sounds really flaky to me. But she's one of those people, as soon as she started speaking, I knew she wasn't flaky. And she was another big influence of my life. She was very influenced by the Quakers, by the way. She grew up in New Jersey, Egg Harbor, New Jersey, and she, like George Fox, went on, made her life a search for realization. And while living in Philadelphia, she was involved with different Quaker organizations. And again, and so much religion in the West is just on a very superficial level, like I'm this and I believe that. And although we do have some real mystics in the West, and there's some very great people, but it tends to be not practical. I mean, when it comes to science, we're very practical, and we just put everything aside and we think, let's see, how am I going to do this? Whereas we tend not to do that with religious realization. And so for some reason, I was drawn to the people that really did make religion kind of more real for them. And this is my understanding of what religion is about. It's the Dalai Lama said something about how he said one of the things that America's great gift to the world was, of all things, Alcoholics Anonymous. Well, for a short time, I attended Alcoholics Anonymous. I've never been an alcoholic, but at one point I was drinking a lot, and I had a friend who was in AA, and he declared I was an alcoholic, so I was not. And what I found in AA is that you have all these people that their life is kind of out of sorts, and then one day they try alcohol, and all of a sudden they find something that really, really works in their life, and it's just great, and makes them get along with people, and makes them more successful. And the problem with alcohol, as with many things in the world, it's got one problem, and that's that it's in time, and it lasts for a while, and then it's gone. And that's the big predicament in life. We have all these things that will make life very bearable and very workable for a while, a good refuge for a while. I mean, if you suddenly have a lot of money and you can go places and vacation and do all kinds of things, it's just wonderful, you know, because you have so much freedom. And there's so many other, you know, from drugs to wealth to businesses to, I mean, there's so much stuff in the world that for a short period makes things better. And you could say, in a sense, it's a relative solution, because as long as you have that thing, it'll work. And then at some point it stops working, just like alcohol and drugs stop working, well, even our bodies stop working. And, you know, we have great scientists who are great, very great in different fields that have a lot of things figured out. Well, we also have some great people in the religious field or spiritual field. But while in the West, we can appreciate great businessmen and really can gauge, is this guy a really good scientist or not? Is he a really good engineer or not? Is he a really good businessman or not? We're not that good at gauging, does this person have a real high level of spiritual realization or not? Yeah, we might think, well, Mother Teresa, well, there's a person with a, you know, big spiritual wealth. But people, if someone has a great scientific ability, they're going to be recognized, because our society has the ability to recognize that. But we seem to have a lesser ability to recognize great religious levels of realization. And we don't have that many, and the people that we do have tend to not be very well known. Well, I was fortunate enough at a very young age to connect with someone that really did know a lot and really had a high level. And as I said, I saw that with George Fox. And such people are very few and far between. And I've met a few others also. Peace Pilgrim is also a very rare person like that. She was homeless, and she would not touch money, and she did not ask for food or shelter. And she had the faith to make that work. And just like, you know, we have an understanding of something like the theory of relativity or quantum mechanics that seem to be very counterintuitive. They don't work in any way that we normally thought they did. But sometimes, somehow, some scientists broke the code. They found things like superposition, where you know, particles act like particles or waves, or the fact that there's no absolute reference for time and all the weird implications of that. And we recognize and honor that. But what we don't recognize is that some people have been able to do the same thing. They found some very powerful spiritual truths that, just like we can believe in scientific proofs, but it's a harder time when they talk about the power of faith, or that all the pleasures of the world are just a mere imitation of something else that is beyond whether you have something or you don't have something, and other spiritual truths. And we kind of discount them. You know, if someone's a scientist, we'll really respect that. But if someone gets the experience that that the spiritual search can put you in a place where you're not dependent on anything outside of you for your inner peace, we think, well, that's kind of suspect, and oh, that's what you believe. And I have to say, in some cultures, I mean, like for instance, in India, in their culture, they have some very great beings that recognize the highest spiritual truths. We have some in the West too, but the difference is, in India, people like that get recognized, whereas in the West, they're just very unknown. And I find even one of the biggest influences of my life, George Fox, I find a lot of Quakers don't quite appreciate him. As, you know, I often find when I try to talk about George Fox to Quakers, a lot of them don't. I would just recommend, he's someone that's good to immerse yourself in. I'd like to tell you, I had a George Fox miracle that I'd like to tell you about, and that's that when I was reading the Journal of George Fox, I noticed that there's a number of editions of the Journal of George Fox. They're all edited, and they all have different material. And I thought, you know, what I would like to find is, I'd like to find the original. What is that? Okay. I would like to find the original Journal of George Fox. So at one point, I spent some time on a pilgrimage where I was a homeless wanderer, and I had a desire to find the original Journal of George Fox because I could never find a complete one. And so one rainy day, I was walking through, of all places, Teaneck, New Jersey. At that time, I was homeless. And because it was raining, I just, there was a library there. I thought I'd step in the library to get out of the rain. And I just walked over to this shelf. I think it was a reference shelf. And there on that shelf was the unabridged Journal of George Fox. And it was a whole bunch of volumes. And oh, wow, there it is. So I picked it up, I started reading it. And when I started reading it, I immediately understood why you only see edited versions, because his journal, as great as it is, it's a wonderful classic of spiritual literature, but he just took kind of rough notes. And so it's pretty hard to get, if you just read the raw journal, it's pretty hard to get into. It needs, you know, a good editor. And anyway, but to me, that was the George Fox. I mean, I've had other, one of the spiritual truths that people tell you is that if you put all your faith in God, what you need for your search for God will come to you. It'll happen. And that I found that out many times, but one of the ways, I mean, one way it happened was finding the Journal of George Fox. Another way, when I was in the Army and missing a stop and stepping off at Shrewsbury meeting, where I ended up becoming very active in that meeting while I was in the Army. Used to go there every Sunday. At one time, somebody from the Army said, "We hear you're visiting some subversive group each Sunday." I mean, they actually, somehow the Army figured out that I was there, because that's the whole Army, that's another story. But my time in the Army, and that I'm not going to get into it here. But it was a miracle. I came back to the base feeling very frustrated and searching and seeking. And there, put right in front of me, was, I got off the bus and I saw the meeting. Oh, look at this, Shrewsbury meeting. And I walked over, and this man said to me, he said, "Oh, welcome." And that man is John Bristowski, who's now one of my Facebook friends. I got to know him very well. He was a professor at NYU and also Red Bank High School. It's a whole other story. But I found, while George Fox was a homeless wanderer, and like Peace Pilgrim was a homeless wanderer, and like the Russian pilgrim in The Way of the Pilgrim was a homeless wanderer, if you just have the attitude, I'm not looking for anything but what I need spiritually, your simple needs will be met. George Fox always found that out. I'm not any kind of spiritual giant, but I found that I always had, just like Peace Pilgrim, just like George Fox, just like the Russian pilgrim, I always had simple meals. My simple needs were always met during that time. And the point I'm making is that that just like you can find things out in science or find things out in the world, you can find things out in religious life. And one of the central truths of religious life is that every pleasure of the world is just an imitation of the divine. And when George Fox went to Pendle Hill, and he had the experience of the world as an expression of God, he said it's something. He said what every mystic that I've read that ever has that experience says, and he said you can't express it in words. because words have all kinds of assumptions built in. They have the very assumption that the whole way the world works. And this is something that's beyond any of the limitations of the world. And one of the amazing things, if you start reading different Catholic saints or Orthodox saints or Hindu saints or Buddhist masters, they talk about, well, what is it when you experience, when you get this realization? And it all sounds remarkably the same. And they all say there's nothing you can say about it. That the very act of trying to say something cancels it. And it's not like he believes this or he believes that. So that's what I got from George Fox. And that's what, if I have anything to say, I'd like to say to you what I want to learn myself. And that is that everything we're really looking for is an expression of the divine. And if we seek it in temporary worldly solutions, and there's many kinds of worldly solutions, that most you're going to get something that works for a while and then you'll lose it. Whereas if you get spiritual realization, it's not of time and space. So I don't want to go over my time. So I'll just stop there.